Hey there, interwebs, I hope you're all doing well, and I am here to review yet another excellent book that I highly recommend all of you getting. This time, a fiction book, and a fantasy one at that, titled Dreams of Fire by Nathaniel Wayne, who many of you may know if you are aware of my channel in any way, shape, or form already, is also the name of one of my close friends and co-host of my podcast and regular contributor to my channel, Vera Wild, aka Council of Geeks here on YouTube if you follow her main channel. I want to be very clear, as I just stated, Vera is a close friend of mine, so I am coming at this review from that perspective. I did get the book, actually the audio book, because I am friends with her. That's how I heard about the book. That's why I knew about it. However, I did tell her that I was not going to review the book if I disliked it. I was just not going to say anything. Like, I'm going to be very honest about my thoughts on her book, and I do have a positive review to give. Otherwise, I wouldn't be recording this one at all. But I do want to at least give that caveat of she is my friend, so if you can take my review with a grain of salt. But if I didn't like the book, I wouldn't be reviewing it at all. And I wouldn't be recommending it. I would just stay silent, and Vera could have a growing resentment towards me for years and years, knowing that I must have hated her book because I didn't review it. I'm more than glad for her to have a years-long resentment towards me. So the fact that I didn't do that should speak well of the book. Vera, if you're watching this, because I know you are, love you, you're the best. Anyways, let's actually talk about this book. I really, really love this. I'm going to keep this spoiler-free because I'm assuming that most of you watching this video have not read the book, because it is a self-published book by a indie author who is not super known as many other folks. So, you know, I'm just assuming that if I go into deep spoilers here, most of you are going to jump ship anyway. So this is going to be mainly a recommendation and me trying to pitch the book to you to try to let you know why I liked it, and if you like these things, why you might like it too, and then sort of give my general thoughts on quality on it, and maybe some points for her down the line. The main sort of idea of this book is that this is a world, a fantasy world, where there are people called elementals. They are people who have, kind of think of your like Avatar: The Last Airbender, but sort of a lot more different types of elements, where there are people who have the ability to use different elements that they are sort of born with, whether it be fire or wind or things like that. However, these elementals are kind of dangerous, because if they don't use their power, it starts to build up and build up within their body, and over the course of like a day or two, they eventually just have to, you know, expunge it, often very violently. And as a result of this, the elementals are viewed as very dangerous. They're ostracized by society, and also they're studied by the Science Guild, which is sort of one of the prominent factions and sort of the main faction that we deal with outside of a city government that we see in this book, that tries to catch elementals and study them, and they don't get much freedom. And any elemental who is on the loose is usually tracked down by a bounty hunter and sort of given to the Science Guild, or are on the run. So quite obviously, there's a lot of very similar like X-Men parallels here, and obviously queer metaphor parallels, which is certainly something that if you know Vera, you would understand why that's why that's very obvious there. But what I really do love about it, and this is something that Vera talks about a lot too when we critique things like Battlestar Galactica, is that this is not intended to be a one-for-one for queerness. Now, obviously, the parallels of like, oh, people have to hide it and not show other people lest they be ostracized. They have to be on the run if they are sort of seen. There's all there in terms of like queer metaphor. However, you know, sometimes when people try to make it a one-for-one thing, especially with independent authors, it tends to be very didactic and also get into problematic territory. Like, for example, with the X-Men or with this elemental idea, like they are literally different. They literally have powers, and so there's literally reasons justifiable within the world to treat them differently in some way. Certainly not to ostracize them or to treat them as second-class citizens like they do, but there is a literal difference with them from quote-unquote sort of human beings that aren't elementals. So like it's very good on Vera for this not to be a singular one-for-one. She takes it as its own thing, and yet what she then uses that to do is to look at a lot of the dynamics of systems and how a lot of these things systemically affect our main character, Ferris, who is a young elemental who is on the run for reasons that you sort of start discovering from the beginning of the book, who is trying to just get away from the Science Guild that had held him captive for many, many years. And obviously there's more to that backstory that we delve into as the book goes on, but I don't want to spoil that too much. But basically he's on the run, trying to hide that he's a fire elemental, and trying not to get caught. But and when you hear that pitch, you immediately think like, okay, Ferris, he's going to be this chosen one character who's going to end up, while he's on the run, changing society in some way, or causing a big scene, or getting involved in a lot of the politics of the land. But what I really love this book for, and again, this is very much Vera's style, is Ferris is never an important character within the structure of the world. Instead, we are mainly focusing on how all of these disparate factors of the world, be it the politics of the city that he goes to try to get a way to get further away from the Science Guild itself coming after him, the bounty hunters who are sent to capture him. Like, all of these things are systems in place to try to capture him, or to limit him, or in some ways may help him, but they're never there to focus on him. The world goes on around him, and he is just a character going through all of these things. And yet also what Vera does really, really wonderfully is personify these systems in characters who are not, perfect representations of the systems, but are also people dealing with the ramifications of those systems. Like, every character in this book, be it the bounty hunter who is chasing after Ferris, or the head of the Science Guild who wants to capture Ferris, or actually one of the professors of the Science Guild. The head of the Science Guild is someone different, but the professor in the Science Guild is trying to capture Ferris. Some people who work within the politics of the city who maybe help or hindering Ferris at different points, all have their own opinions on the world that they live in that don't necessarily neatly one-to-one match up with the office or job that they have within that world. Characters even that come across, like, there's one character, the bounty hunter character, who for most of the book, and again, I won't spoil specifics, but for most of the book kind of came across as that one-note sort of mustache twirly kind of villain character in the book, does get a lot of surprising character development in the latter half of the book. And it's never the book going and stopping and saying, hey, this is this character's character development, here's their backstory. No, it allows us to learn about these characters through the actions that they take in terms of, everything that's going on with Ferris and the stuff around him. It is a lot of revealing character in very, very smart ways that never just stops and tells you this who this character represents or what they are. And in fact, a lot of our characters' presumptions about who these characters are based on, their job or their role, actually affects like how Ferris deals with them, and maybe get more nuanced down the line as we go. And the same thing sort of happens with how we as the reader learn about these characters. There are characters like the professor who's trying to capture Ferris, who obviously again comes across as a sort of one-note, like, angry professor who's like only focused on science for science sake and doesn't actually see the people around her, the people that she's experimenting on, the elementals that she's experimenting on. And there's some fun little subversion and play with that. Again, I don't want to go into too much detail, but like, every character who you meet, you're like, this is a one-note archetype that I would see in any type of fantasy, gets a little bit more nuance as we go, and I loved that. The other thing that I really love with Vera's story here is that the world that we're placed into also is not ever fully explained. We get the sense that there is a whole world here. Like, there's a lot of magic systems going on. Like, obviously each elemental has their own different rules and rules set. And in fact, there's some characters who have elemental powers that we don't even know what the element is or how it's explained or how it works. But Vera, I've talked to her about, is like, do you know? And she knows perfectly, but like, we just get little hints of it. And so there's this great sense of mystery of the world. And yet we are only dealing with how Ferris, or the characters that we sort of get viewpoints on, see that world. And it sort of gives this sense of like, there's so much here that we could explore, and yet we never get that sort of like wizard sitting down to explain the world's politics to you moment. We just sort of go through it with him, and yet it's always very understandable. Like, for example, one of the coolest things in the book that we only get little bits and pieces of is that in the forest that's outside this main city that we deal with, there are fairies. And they're not like cutesy little fairies that you see in a lot of like sort of children's fantasy, but like the actual terrifying fairy folk from folklore. And Vera uses that to give us some really really good horror. Like, if you like body horror, like, the book is not filled to the brim with body horror. It's a more sort of typical magical setting for fantasy. But if you like forest horror or body horror, there is a little bit of that there for you in this, and it's actually one of the coolest things that I have read in a sort of body horror fantasy genre. It was just a very cool and messed up visual that I really loved that had to do with the fairies. And yet we never get a full sense of how the fairies work in this world. We get hints of their larger motives and what's going on with them or what they want, and yet they continually remain beyond our understanding. Whereas the systems of the human world, we can 100% fairly understand and wrap our mind around. The fairies never get that, and I really love that Vera sort of creates this sort of unknowable being and never sits down to explain to us anything. Like, at the end of the book, there's a huge portion that involves the fairies and the fairies' motivation, and yet it's never explained. You can presume, you can guess, you can kind of like be like, all right, I'm pretty sure this is what they were trying to do, and it's not sort of, it leaves you with a sense of finality about that, and yet you never 100% know why or what the goal, what the ultimate goal was, even if you can know what the like small term goals were. So like all of that is really cool, but also Vera's setting just has a lot of cool world building elements. Like there's the science guild, then we have like a magical guild as well. I forget exactly what they were called. Vera will yell at me later, but we don't get to focus on them as much. But they are existing here, and they're sort of like magic versus science ideas going on within this world, and sort of different ways of thinking about it, and sort of different ways of thinking about how to build things. And so you get this sort of like interesting sort of electro, like steampunky kind of vibe to a little bit of it. There are some scenes too that tend to go on a little bit too long. Like there's one sequence early in the book where Vera follows a character sort of going through the science guild, and it's used to explain the science guild, and we get to see the different pieces of it, but it's just this character kind of going through it, and it does sort of a little bit feel like, all right, we're following every beat of the action rather than just getting to the point. You know, it's something that like if I was, you know, I'm a film person, so if I was directing it, I'd be like, all right, do we need to see the character walk from here and across this room to get to here, talk to this person, get to this point? Like, obviously it's like showing us the world a little bit, and we do get some information there, but it felt like, okay, we could have told this in a little bit more faster way. And that's not all the way through the book, because I think through most of the time her world building is fairly natural and we get into it very easily, but there are a few moments like that where I'm like, can we combine this into a little bit more action or things going on. So, you know, it's just one of those things where like it's a little uneven in different places, where like different problems at different spots, that is clearly like coming from this being a first author's work. So it's like knowing where to do this and this amount in this spot and then this amount in another spot, and just finding a better sort of leveling of that is something that I think would improve the book a little bit, and certainly I think it's something that will improve as she writes hopefully more books down the line, which I hope she does. So basically, just to wrap out on this, if you like stories that are set in really good, interesting fantasy worlds, but focus on like the smaller scale people, not the chosen ones, the grander things going on, but it's still a really big world regardless. If you like something like Star Wars Andor, not that this is necessarily as anti-fascist as Star Wars Andor, but like characters on the ground level, dealing with ground level stuff as bigger things are going on around them, then this book will be perfect for you. I would highly, highly recommend for that. Also, I would recommend the audiobook as well, because Vera got, I want to make sure I get her name right, Alia E. Tori, to read the book for her, and she is fantastic. Like, legitimately an amazing narrator for this book. Like, her voices are so freaking good. Could not recommend the audiobook enough if you're looking for an audiobook version over a physical version, which is what I did as well. So that's my thoughts on Dreams of Fire. I highly recommend it. Again, take that with a grain of salt, because Vera is my friend, but I would not be giving a review if I did not give my uncritical, unfiltered thoughts on it. So I did like the book. I enjoyed it. So I hope you will as well.